Let us bring, is Jenna on? Let's bring on Jenna Ellis. She's the Director of Public Policy for the James Dobson Family Institute, an accomplished constitutional law attorney. She's appeared just about everywhere, but most importantly, she's appeared here and will continue to appear here every time something happens at the Supreme Court. Her book is The Legal Basis for a Moral Constitution, a guide for Christians to understand America's current constitutional crisis. Jenna, you're going to have to start paying rent here.
Well, thank you so much for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be on, and especially with all the things that are going on in the Supreme Court, I anticipate that we'll have many future conversations.
I hope so. I hope so. It really has been incredibly busy. So what do you think? What's your take?
I agree with what you just said, that Kavanaugh is really the safe pick. And I have to ask, why were conservatives so excited about Amy Barrett? Well, because of who she was as a woman, who she was as a mother. She has 7 children. She's very pro-life. She's very Christian. All of those things are incredibly important. But when it comes to the legal of what a confirmation hearing is all about and what a justice ultimately on the Supreme Court is vested with doing under their oath of office, there really should be no significant difference between Barrett and Kavanaugh when we're talking about originalism. And that's why I think that President Trump likely selected him, because Kavanaugh will probably skirt some of the more difficult questions like Senator Feinstein posed to Amy Coney Barrett when she was up for confirmation for the 7th Circuit. And Brett Kavanaugh has been very, as you said, he's on the record with over 300 decisions. He's been an originalist. He has made decisions on the D.C. Circuit Court recognizing his margins of being on the circuit court, not on the Supreme Court. So he's not only a safe pick, but I think is one that ultimately will serve conservatism. And when we're talking about what conservatism really means, we're conserving the Constitution, preserving the rule of law. And so I'm actually excited about this pick. I think that any one of the 25 would have been great, but especially right before midterms, this was very savvy of the president.
I'm really happy to hear you say that, because you're with James Dobson Family Institute. So I know you're what the left would call an alt-right, far-right, right, alt, social conservative. So you actually are happy. I mean, I felt the same way. The thing that bothered me about Amy Barrett is that the biography is great, but that's not always a good indication of who a person is on the bench. I mean, that's where it all tells. So let me ask you about some of these decisions that have given conservatives pause. All right. There's a couple of things. They love the fact that he's a strong Second Amendment guy. He's very big on gun rights. But he had this decision, Seven Sky, and it was kind of a complicated thing. But this is where he said his court didn't have jurisdiction over Obamacare, not because their penalty was a tax, but because it was assessed and collected as if it were a tax. And this later, people feel, fed into John Roberts' I think terrible decision, saying that this was a tax and that's why Obamacare was constitutional. Does this give you any pause at all?
In looking at a circuit court judge, they are bound not only by the Constitution, but also precedent. Because if we look at Article 3, then there is one Supreme Court and any other such inferior courts, and that word inferior is key. And so for this decision, as well as the others that some on the right do have concerns about with Kavanaugh, I think that the questions that need to come out from the GOP senators are asking him to explain his judicial philosophy. And if he can explain this by saying, I was bound by not only the law that Congress passed, because taxation under the 16th Amendment, as well as in Article 1, Section 8, that's given to Congress. And so he on the circuit court, it has to stay within his margin and within those lanes. But if he describes it that way in his confirmation hearings, that should actually be hopeful for conservatism, because when then something like Roe versus Wade and that type of an abortion decision and that type of case may come in front of him, then we can hope and expect that he will likewise stay in the constitutional lane and say those types of decisions, all of the social issues, are fully unconstitutional under federalism and need to be given back to the states. So I think that we can't just look at the ultimate decision. We have to look at the rationale, because the legal rationale is almost always the key to understanding a judicial philosophy.
Oh, okay. I want to ask you about Roe v. Wade because this is, of course, the scare tactic of the left. This is always the thing that is up. So Roe v. Wade, another decision that Kavanaugh was involved in the circuit court. This was where the illegal immigrant was demanding that she be given an abortion before being deported, before anything else. And he agreed with the court that she should not have the right to get an abortion before she was deported, that this was not an undue burden on her. But he didn't attack Roe v. Wade in the decision. And so conservatives felt that that was a red flag. Is that a red flag to you?
I don't think so in the context of that opinion, because again, whether or not he wanted to do what we call in the legal world dicta, which is kind of the off subject and indicating where the court may go if a case arose in front of a judge that they actually had that particular subject matter. But for him, again, this is just staying in his lane because Planned Parenthood versus Casey is unfortunately currently the precedent from the Supreme Court. It's unconstitutional. We've talked about that, Andrew, and why. And yet, being on the D.C. Circuit Court, he is still bound by that and respects the rule of law, respects stare decisis as a principle. And so to not go out of his way to attack from an ideological perspective is actually what a judge should do. Because remember, these judicial officers are not vested with political commentary. In fact, the Judicial Code of Ethics, which covers all federal judges and even state judges, doesn't cover Supreme Court justices. They're not supposed to indicate their political preferences. And so when we look at the confirmation hearings, this type of line of questioning is totally irrelevant to his fitness on the bench. And we also have to remember, I agree with what you said in the beginning as well, that this is totally just a political talking point because this is the left attacking President Trump. Trump is not the one being confirmed here. It's just a judge and whether or not he will follow his oath of office to uphold the Constitution. Okay, great.
That's a really good take. I have one more I want to run by you because these are the things that conservatives were worried about before he was picked. Some of the reasons that they were looking at Amy Barrett and giving her better marks, basically, than Kavanaugh. The other one was one where the Obamacare was trying to force some priests to pay for contraception. Priests for Life, I think the organization was called. And Kavanaugh made the right decision. He came down on the basis of the priests' rights to their religious convictions. But he did concede that the government had a compelling interest in providing contraception to the employees. Now, as I read the decision, and I thought he was just saying that this is what the Supreme Court had decided through Anthony Kennedy in I guess it was the Hobby Lobby case. But this made conservatives very nervous. Here's another one. Does this, as an alt-right, alt person, does this bother you at all?
Yeah, that's another one that I think that that would be an appropriate line of questioning to ask him to say, where do you balance this sort of strict scrutiny versus intermediate scrutiny and these types of constitutional principles where you're balancing a legitimate or compelling governmental interest? How do you define those versus a fundamental right? And so the fundamental free exercise of religion, Judge Kavanaugh has been through the Federalist Society. I mean, I think he led one of the religious liberty groups while he was there when he was still in private practice. I mean, he has a remarkable record on issues of First Amendment and religious liberty. And so for these types of opinions, that's where the Senate really does need to come in and say, if this is something that's genuinely bothering conservatives, and I think that is a legitimate question for him, to just have him explain that and say, how do you, in your judicial analysis, balance this so that we can have that on the record, because that would be a function of his capacity as a judge.
Well, I have to say, you've given me a lot of hope. You have a very optimistic view of this. You obviously feel this is a strong pick. Am I getting that right?
I do. And I think that all four of the top candidates, as well as the list of 25, I mean, President Trump had a vetted list. This was open and transparent more than any other president. And so he really couldn't make a wrong decision here. Kavanaugh was not my particular first choice. I don't think it was with the James Dobson Family Institute. But at the same time, we recognize that that President Trump had a great list of excellent jurists to pick from. And as long as the nominee and the eventual confirmed justice will conserve the Constitution, that's what we need to really, really care about, not their political preferences and not their personal lives.
I couldn't agree more. Can you tell me who the first pick was?
I really liked Amy Barrett.
Yeah, me too.
I also liked Kethledge, and I liked her from the standpoint, frankly, of not only optics, but I think that we just had a trust in what her judicial philosophy was, not because of who she is as a person, but I really liked her Notre Dame Law Review article on stare decisis. I think as a professor, she had a lot of judicial philosophy that was very transparent that we don't necessarily see in some of these opinions because they don't get as philosophical as they are legal.
Okay. Jenna Ellis, Director of Public Policy for the James Dobson Family Institute. You should probably just stay on the line until we talk to you again.
Sounds good. Yeah. You have me on speed dial, so anytime.
All right. I hope to see you soon. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.
So that was very optimistic. I'm really happy to hear that. I kind of feel the same way. I think this is a good, solid pick.